Hello, everyone. Hello. So before we get started on the panel, I did want to take a moment to congratulate Tracy and Press Forward for this event. Yes. And I say that because a year ago, I'm on the board for the Local Media Association, as is Tim Franklin, Steve Waldman, and Judy Tetrazos, who is here somewhere. But a year ago, we did a local news summit in Detroit. And we thought then, we chose Michigan because we thought it would be a model for bringing together all of the people that are in this room. And instead, it ended up, I think, being a draft. Because when the board met to debrief after the event in Detroit, we really started pushing around the idea of bringing it to Illinois. But LMA did not want to do it again because it was so much work. And it wasn't until Tracy stepped in at the summit and said that Press Forward could take it. And so when I look across this room and see all the people in this room, I'm grateful. But I think that this summit will become a model for what other states could do as well. So congratulations. So the one thing that I'm excited about in leading this conversation, particularly as a follow-up to what Steve just got through presenting on public policy, because I think that when I look at across this stage, there are different voices and perspectives I think that are important to this conversation. So from philanthropy, from the political spectrum, and then I'm excited that we actually have both Democratic and GOP representation on this stage. That is important, I think, for us to have all perspectives and voices, as well as news as well. So, what'd you say? I said that'd be me. Yes, no, great. So, I'm gonna start my first question actually to Steve Stadelman, mainly because it was in 2021 when he started pushing legislation for this tax credit, which actually ended up getting implemented last year. And as you heard from the applause earlier, Chicago Public Media has benefited from that. There are now, and Steve talked a little bit about this earlier, there are now 6 states that contribute $72 million in state funding, or $74 million. And this is the second year for Illinois. And so I wanted for the senator to start really to give us an overview. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do to enact that kind of legislation. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that process.
Well, first of all, I appreciate all the advocates and organizations that have helped us get to this point, whether it's Tim at Medill Northwestern, Steve at Rebo Local News, Press Forward. It's been interesting to see people just step out and help out, especially not only to formulate ideas and some of the ideas that we passed legislatively, but just to be a sounding board and to just increase awareness. It's been really heartwarming as a former journalist to see that people get this. People understand that there's a real problem here. We need to come up with a new way, and I think government needs to be part of the solution. It's not the panacea. It's not going to solve the problem, but it can be part of the solution moving forward. So I just want to thank everybody who's been involved with that. I think we're off to a good start with the legislation. When we put the task force together, I was just determined we have a lot of task forces in Springfield, and you meet, or you don't meet, and you don't do anything. And I was bound to determine that this task force was at least going to come forward with legislation, and all the people that were on the task force, it was bipartisan. I was happy to come up with a package of proposals and to get some things through. So that doesn't always happen when it comes to government task forces. I think we're off to a good start, but I still think it's very much a work in progress. As was mentioned, this is the first year. As the governor and Steve mentioned, some really positive trends are happening right now, but I still think it's very early. We're in year 2, and as you saw from Steve's figures, there's much more interest, there's much more awareness, and that's great, but I think that could present more problems that we need to figure out and additional tweaks that we need to make. And I'm really curious to see what the results will be at the end of this fiscal year and what we can do. We need to continue refining this. At the end of the day, we're in 5 years, this is a 5-year program, $25 million over those 5 years. We've got to go back to the legislature and say, this is what we're doing. This is the intent, and this is how we fulfilled that intent. It's going to be incredibly important to show that we were able to make a difference. And so our big focus, it's great to pass legislation and hold news conferences about new bills, but you also need to focus on stuff that you've passed and make sure that these programs are working. And that's really been a focal point for me moving forward, is that where the dollars going? Is it distributed equally across the state? I'm a former journalist, and one thing that drives my philosophy is that one person, one more body in that newsroom can make all the difference in the world, whether you're a small operator or even a larger operator. Just that extra person, that extra body to report or investigate can make a big difference. And that's why I really am happy to see how it's distributed across the board of different operations. And to me, that tenet needs to continue, that it can help some small operation in Southern Illinois, that only media outlet, stay on board and keep operating. That's going to drive the process. So I think the things we can do, that we can continue to improve that, and I just want to see that process work. Steve mentioned about the government set-aside program. I want to see it transparently where the dollars are going. So that's one area we can continue working on the forward. We passed a 120-day notification requirement. The idea is that local ownership is best, and if local operators are aware of potential sales and keep it local, that's the goal. But is it working the way we think it's working? We've had some interesting developments the past couple of months regarding that 120-day notice, so we may need to refine that. So to me, I want to continue exploring new ideas, but let's focus on what we've done and make sure it's working properly.
Thank you, Senator. I think when I go back and I always, and I won't use the word enjoy, seeing Tim Franklin present I won't use the word enjoy, but it is informative. I think it's sobering, but it is one of those things that I think we all have to, I think it's important knowledge for us, seeing the news deserts and where we're headed. And so when I think about that, and this question is for you, Senator Lewis, is that the more than, I want to say, let me look at my notes here, half of the recipients come from, for the tax credit, are actually outside of Chicago. And I think 3 of those are in your district, the Daily Herald, the Shaw Publishing, the Des Plaines Journal, which all received a combined of $340,000. I do think as part of this conversation, it is important to hear from a different perspective or an additional perspective on the role of the government in funding local journalism. And so we'd love to hear your insight on that.
Thank you, everyone. Honored to be here. Invited by my colleague, Senator Stadelman. We were sitting at the table, and I said, I hope I voted for your bill. I'm pretty sure I did. Now, this wasn't a partisan thing. It sounds good if it was presented, so I'm pretty sure I did. But to the question directly, I am a firm believer in local news. I grew up in rural Iowa, and there was nothing better, and that was the Marshalltown Times, of seeing yourself as an athlete in the newspaper, expanding into, my father was part of the Rotary Club and different things, and that local newspaper brought the community together. And now as I am in suburban Chicagoland, western suburbs of DuPage, the Daily Herald, Shaw Media, I believe, who you mentioned, and the others, that's gone away. And even our local newspaper there, the Bartlett Examiner, has gone bankrupt. And that's where the Bartlett High School students where I live would see their names in the newspaper. So we're losing that fabric of community. And it's important that we support that as the government, but we do not expand to the point in which we're violating the separation of free speech and press. So that's a tough balance that as a policymaker, still working through. While I have a few more minutes, I'd expand upon the question in a different realm because I breathe a little different oxygen. I'm not a newspaper person. I'm not a journalist. I'm not in the space. And I've been listening here as how would I address things as a policymaker. First I heard was the First Amendment is under attack. And I said, okay. But there's 5 parts of the First Amendment. religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. What I believe is, yes, the press portion is absolutely under attack, but the free speech portion is stronger than ever. You can have anyone and everyone on a social media platform saying whatever they want and getting 6 million, 10 million going viral. Why I believe that's happening? Our legacy news outlets have been kept in check by the trial lawyers or liability. They've been kept in check by slanderous laws. And as we get into this new distribution model of content, the individual really is not being held in check. So you have a battle of two parts of the First Amendment that are going after one another. And right now, the press portion is definitely losing. And we can indicate that it's the White House or other things that caused it. But that genie is out of the bottle. So cause is different than what do we do in the future. The second part I heard, and sorry, Madam President, but I told you this at the table, caused me concern, is that we're proud to have 150 funders who are funding local media because they believe it's important as an outlet for them to advertise or promote what is important to them. I struck that as conflict of interest. Now, I was promptly corrected that there is complete independence, there is no collusion, but as an average citizen and policymaker, how do I understand that there's no collusion? And that 115 mega donors are not controlling what we're hearing, listening to, and seeing every day while we're trying to promote an objective, non-biased arena. So I'll let the other panelists have time, but just as a policymaker, those two things stuck out to me that as I look to vote yes, no, consider policy that are important to me. So thank you.
No, you're welcome. You're welcome. And yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, because when we were at the table and you expressed concern about the influence that funders can have over journalism, it's important to know whether you are as big as Chicago Public Media or you're as small as the smallest here, that all of us fight for independent journalism, and that's key to what we do, whether we are getting funding from philanthropic operatives or whether we are getting it from advertising or whoever. So I appreciate that. So Jhmira, I wanted to talk a little bit, particularly you represent with Public Narrative and with SEMA some of the small but mighty news organizations. And so if you could talk a little bit about the work that Public Narrative does concerning public policy, and then just how you are experiencing, we talk positively about the tax credits. That may or may not be the case for everyone. That may have a more difficult time trying to navigate that. So if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure, thanks, Tracy. Public Narrative has been around for nearly 40 years, working with community media and working with nonprofit organizations and bringing the groups together. In present day, we have 4 different focus areas: public safety, public health, and public education. And when we acquired the Chicago Independent Media Alliance, or SEMA, we added public media. And in that work, we took on the task of implementing the executive order that the city of Chicago, that former Mayor Lori Lightfoot signed in 2022. Now that work, as you can imagine, 4 years ago, it's been grueling, but we are near the finish line and seeing some implementation. And I'm thankful for Rebuild Local News, because in coming together with those folks, they've gathered us in other cities who have had similar pain points. So we've talked with San Francisco, we've talked with New York, and in being able to share where we are, I see a lot of light at the end of the tunnel, because what looks grim, ultimately they're like, oh no, this is a natural part of the process. And so in that navigating that, we're launching in the middle of May. We're launching the Shy Media Exchange, which will be an advertising marketplace for government entities and local media to handle their advertising transactions. Another part of that is in understanding the capacity that local news has for meeting with audiences that they may not ordinarily reach. And so in December, we hosted a community and media conference gathering over 200 journalists and community members. And so we'll engage all of those folks within that platform. But our hope and our goal is to create a seamless process for procurement. We've been in conversation with different government entities. We've had conversations with the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus. We've had conversations with the Cook County Board President's Office. And so we're expanding that to look at an ethnic media coalition or consortium led by 13th District Cook County Board Commissioner Josina Morita. And we're really excited about what that project looks like because we have our first, with the exception of the senators, of course, but in this case, we have our first endorsers of the executive order navigated in this particular way.
Okay, good. So thank you. So Hugh, Julie talked a little bit earlier on one of the earlier panels just about the work that the Joyce Foundation is doing from a funder, being a donor, but also in public policy. And I wonder for you, especially being a former journalist who worked in print when upwards of 80% of our revenue came from advertising, can you talk a little bit about like and especially having that kind of a view and experience about what the role of public policy through philanthropic organizations like the Joyce Foundation?
Sure. Let me say this, as a former journalist who still considers himself a journalist, it's really gratifying that to see this many people come together and acknowledge that we have a real problem with local news, and we have some real gaps out there, and it's gotten to the point where we need some extraordinary measures to deal with it. Joyce. Well, let me say this. I can speak for the Joyce Foundation. I can't speak for all philanthropy. I can speak for the Joyce Foundation. I also can speak to Press Forward a little bit. Thanks to Dale Anglin, public policy is a priority for this group of philanthropies who have come together to try to figure out how we can help solve the problems. Right? We can make all kinds of investments. There is probably no bigger return on investment than if we can harness public dollars to help make sure this public good is available to the public. I had a whole spiel ready for why this is a public good, but after listening to John and Julie and Maribel, I think we can all assume that this is a public good. Joyce has been working for 50 years on public policy development on education, on access to water, public safety. These public policy is part of the answer for long-term solutions to these things. You can argue that rigorously reported facts are also a public good, and maybe the public good that underpins all the other public goods. So we're interested as a philanthropy in using our experience and our expertise and exploring whether some of these measures can be harnessed to make sure this public good is available to the public. We know it's tricky business. We know that there is press freedoms to protect and journalistic independence to protect. And with all due respect, we need to make sure that these measures, meddling politicians can't get their hands on these things to reward their friends and punish the people they don't like. So we know, as Steve said, we know we need to go through this very carefully, but we think we can get the guardrails around the best measures and make this work for this public good. So what did Joyce do with this on this bill? There's a number of entry points for philanthropy in this space. There's public education, there's research, there's coalition building, there's implementation, there's evaluation. We don't lobby for bills, this measure or that measure. We leave that up to the politicians and the experts who know what they're doing. But we can weigh in where there are resources needed to make sure these things get carried out properly. I got a call people who know Joyce Foundation and know our role. I got a call even before the bill was passed and said, we're going to need some help with implementation on this. So we engaged with the Illinois Press Foundation, I think Jeff Rogers is right over there, to provide pro bono legal and accounting assistance to all the newsrooms across the state so they could figure out this bill. It's a complicated bill. It's the tax code. Some of these operations are really small. They needed help in figuring out, A, whether they qualified, and then B, how they submit. So we had seminars. We tried to pull together an advisory panel. We tried to get everybody together and help, especially the really small outlets, get access to this thing. As Steve mentioned, there's still some work to do there. The second thing we did is we contracted with Steve's team at Rebuild Local News and brought them in and asked them to do a one-year evaluation. How did it work in the first year? And they spent a number of months on that, looking at the different aspects of whether it worked or it didn't work. Some of the basic questions. Was there any evidence of meddling in the system by politicians or state officials or anything like that? They found no evidence of that. Was the criteria good for who qualified and who didn't? I think the senator and others built this bill in a way that disqualified Pink Slime and other outfits that were pretending to be local news outlets, but weren't doing local reporting, were owned outside the state, those kinds of things. Steve's operation took a look at that. And then also who got the credit in the end. And we have some work to do. I think that overall, the results were really good. It was, it wasn't just in Chicago. It wasn't the big outlets. It was small outlets, but there were some groups in there that weren't represented as strongly as they should be. Ethnic media, small ethnic media, broadcast, university-based public media. And so as the senator says, he's interested in going back and looking at whether this worked, what we can do better. I think their philanthropy could play a role presenting the resources to help make sure we get this all right.
Right.
I'll stop there.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, and I'd love for any of you to take it or all if we have time. I think we don't, though. But the one thing that I was wondering is the balance of, because when you look at the different perspectives that we all come from, and the balance of how we fund journalism, and I think about our own part at Chicago Public Media. We're working on this Chicago Media Collective with Press Forward, Tracy Bain, and many people in this room to provide a shared services for advertising that will not benefit just Chicago Public Media, but more than 35 or 39, I think it's 40 now, news outlets who are participating in this. And so we hope to, launch that and announce more about that soon. But I just wondered, if everyone could go quickly and answer it, like, what is the right balance that we all should play in funding journalism?
I'll go first real quick. I don't have the exact answer, but it needs to be fair, balanced, causing the public to get back involved and actually believing fact. Loss of fact and belief in fact is doing more damage than anything, in my opinion. So whatever solution it is, it has to be trusted and get back to fact.
I still think there's a fundamental interest in local news. People want local news, and they will pay for local news. We just got to figure out a business model. As far as what that looks like, the funding model, I don't know. We're going to be an increasingly fragmented media moving forward. I don't think we even know what that looks like yet. But funding models and how the framework that exists, all the above approach. I don't think it's one particular factor that's going to make a difference. What the balance is, I think we need all the above approach, different, whether it's nonprofit, profit. All hands on deck, all revenue sources are going to be possible trying to move this situation forward.
I'll agree with that. I think the answer is all the really smart news entrepreneurs out there, and there's a whole bunch of them in this room, are going to figure this out, how to rebuild that business model by creating value with facts that are going to connect them with audiences again. That is the main thing. And then until we get there, we're going to need a little bit of philanthropy. We're going to need a little bit of government and public resources and that kind of thing. In the end, there will be a mix, but it'll mostly be reconnecting with audiences, and that's got to come out of the newsrooms.
And I agree. For me, I think it's about capacity building and being able to ensure that newsrooms have the capacity to apply for programs like the tax credit, that folks have the capacity to cover stories simultaneously with participating in various programs. And I don't know, maybe there is some sort of tax credit senators that newsrooms could get for even participating in professional development programs. When we think about the sustainability of local news, we want to pour into those leaders who are invested in their communities, but there's also a need for a bit of a breather from time to time. And so just in being able to navigate the nuances of establishing and sustaining a local news outlet, I'm thankful for the funders in this room because they've invested in my organization and my leadership significantly through the years. And so being able to really take a step back and look at how we as Public Narrative as an organization can even support with capacity building. Our Vice President of Journalism and Media Engagement, Sylvia Ewing, led us on an editorial campaign last year that allowed us to provide micro grants to some of our charter SEMA members. And so that project really helped us to stir the momentum in helping folks understand what a public narrative powered SEMA looks like.
Well, thank you all. It was a great conversation. Thank you.